Excellency, Mr. President Goodluck Jonathan, Mr. Jan Eliasson, UN Deputy Secretary General, Dr. Kozana Samazuma, President, African Union Commission, Mr. Carlos Lopez, UN Under-Secretary General, Mr. Pierre Moscovici, Minister of Finance, France, the chair of the session, Dr. Donald Kabaruka, President of the African Development Bank, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, Minister of Finance, honorable ministers, special guests, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I too am honored to be here to share with you our experiences and achievements in the process of formulating the post-2015 development agenda from an African perspective. As you may know, the African regional process has featured multiple regional and sub-regional consultations, technical meetings, meetings of the Sherpas of the high-level committee to articulate a common African position on the post-2015 development agenda. The main objective of the continental and regional consultations was to produce a demand-driven agenda from multiple stakeholders in Africa. In this regard, the process entailed working with various partner institutions in inclusive events through which the viewpoints of a wide range of African stakeholders, which included governments, regional economic entities, civil society, non-governmental organizations, academia, youth, women, think tanks, and the private sector were captured. These consultations culminated in a draft Common African Position, which was presented to the African heads of state during the 21st Ordinary Session of the AU Summit in May 2013 in Addis Ababa. The summit established a high-level committee of 10 heads of states and government, which I was asked to chair. The regional deans identified the following 2 representatives of the high-level committee from each of Africa's regions: West Africa, Liberia and Guinea, North Africa, Algeria and Mauritania, Central Africa, Congo and Chad, East Africa, Ethiopia and Mauritius, Southern Africa, Namibia and South Africa. The summit tasked the high-level committee to further refine the CAP and build consensus on the priorities that had been identified. The summit also requested the African Union Commission, in consultation with regional economic committees and relevant stakeholders, to engage member states and work with our Permanent Representatives Committee in Addis Ababa and the Africa Group in New York, together with partner institutions, to ensure that the CAP fed into the post-2015 development agenda. The high-level panel circulated the draft CAP to all member states and regs and conducted consultations with a group of African ambassadors in Geneva in July 2013. The high-level committee also undertook a series of consultations in Washington, D.C., with African ambassadors and the World Bank Africa Group of Executive Directors and their alternates, and in New York with permanent representatives at the United Nations who will carry on much of the negotiations. To implement the decision of the summit, the African Union Commission, in collaboration with my office, first organized a series of technical meetings with partners and representatives of the heads of states and governments in Monrovia to discuss the terms of reference of the Secretariat, define modalities for supporting the work of the high-level committee in finalizing the common position and the formulation of a roadmap. The first meeting of the HLC was held on 23rd September 2013 in New York in the margins of the UN General Assembly, which approved the roadmap and the establishment of a technical working group that comprised the UN ECA, UN FPA, NEPAD, UNDP, and African Development Bank to refine the draft cap. A secretariat dedicated to follow up and coordinate the HLC was set up at the African Union Commission under the leadership of Dr. Anthony Maruping, AU Commissioner for Economic Affairs, and the general guidance of the Commission President, Dr. Zuma. Following the outcome of the New York meeting, the technical team and our Sherpas met several times to incorporate the comments received from various stakeholders and build consensus around the priority areas of the draft cap and to fine-tune and agree on the outline of the document. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the revised cap was presented to African leaders at the January 2014 AU Heads of States and Governments Summit in Addis. The African leaders welcomed the report of the HLC and adopted the cap with the proviso that peace and security be transformed from an enabler to the status of a pillar. The HLC, in a meeting hosted by President Idris Deby Itno in N'Djamena on February 28, 2014, endorsed the changes to the document requested at the summit. The HLC members also discussed a strategy for advocacy, negotiation, and forging alliances around the cap during this meeting. The common African position, drawing from the African Union 2063 long-term agenda, is a resolve to deliver on our various declarations and commitments on the social and economic integration, poverty eradication, and employment generation for our people. The cap aims at reorienting the development paradigm away from externally driven initiatives toward domestically inspired and funded initiatives. It is thus based on 6 pillars: structural economic transformation, science, technology, and innovation, people-centered development, environmental sustainability, peace and security, and partnership for development. At the core of each pillar, there is a strong commitment to good governance. These pillars are the indispensable building blocks for an integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa, driven and managed by its people and representing a dynamic force in the international arena. It recognizes that sustainable and equitable development can only be guaranteed when people are the means and the end of the economic growth process, and that Africa is committed to remain focused on pertinent development issues by completing the unfinished MDG business, by focusing on the quality aspect of service delivery in the areas of education and health, and by responding to the social and economic consequences of Africa's changing demographic structure. The cap is resolved to reverse Africa's dependence on a cluster of primary commodities and to create decent jobs and strengthen resilience to external shocks. It aims to deepen and sustain the improved socio-economic performance of the continent by harnessing science, technology, and innovation. It postulates a sustainable development agenda for Africa, anchored by the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. The cap captures the commitment of African leaders to promote effective, open, and participatory governance at national, regional, and international levels, with acknowledgement that the achievement of development objectives require peace and security, promoted by measures to prevent the outbreak of armed conflicts, thus addressing the root causes of conflict, including economic and social inequalities. The CAP finally recognizes that Africa's priorities must be financed, and to this end, resource mobilization and innovative financing will need to be effective. Now that Africa has developed a common position and is ready to speak with one voice for the priorities for the post-2015 era to be heard, the next step will consist of advocacy and negotiations. The success of this advocacy and the ensuing negotiations will depend on Africans, policymakers, and all stakeholders taking full ownership of this development agenda. In addition to its task of leading the finalization process of the draft CAP, the ERA HLC was also mandated to forge alliances around the CAP. Indeed, the regions of the world and major groups such as G20, G77, the BRICS, etc., have different interests to defend in the post-2015 development discussion. The battle could be tough, but Africa needs allies to support some of its major priorities, notably those in the economic era, pushing for the development of productive capacities, focusing on the structural economic transformation objective. Furthermore, it is good to observe that the 19 areas of focus identified by the UN Open Working Group on the SDGs encompass most of African priorities. Notwithstanding this realization, we must forge ahead with advocacy and negotiations to ensure that Africa's voice is not only heard, but well taken and reflected in the successor to the MDGs. In conclusion, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the process of developing a common African position has been analytical and widely inclusive, consultative, and interactive. The aim is to ensure that our priorities are clearly articulated for both inputting into the global process of developing the post-2015 development agenda, and most importantly, for underpinning African country future development plans and priorities. These development plans and priorities will guide our efforts to promote inclusive development on the continent and provide a basis for our engagement with our development partner. The world has greatly evolved since the MDGs were first put forth at the beginning of the millennium, almost 15 years ago. Africa faces new challenges, but has now great opportunities that can and must be translated into dividends for the benefits of our people. The creation of a common development agenda is a historic development and is a call to action for all of us. As we embark on the working of the post-2015 development agenda, we must not forget that as we still have some time left to focus our energy and resources on those areas of the MDGs where there have been challenges which need to be completed. By committing ourselves to implement the recommendations of this common position, we will not only transform the current realities of our people, but we will also fulfill a sacred duty of leaving a stable, peaceful, and resourceful Africa to future generations. We must all endeavor to have a better Africa to leave to our children and grandchildren than the one we inherited. The people of Africa have spoken. We have listened, and now is the time for action. I thank you.